You are about to learn a true story that brought together faith, deceit, and new beginnings in a small fishing village. What if the devotion that was supposed to save lives ended up destroying entire families? Prepare yourself for a surprising revelation that could shake everything you believe in. In an isolated fishing village on the Brazilian coast, where the ocean hides mysteries as deep as its currents, the true story of São Benedito unfolds. A testimony that needs to be revealed and that will certainly touch your soul. This remarkable narrative transports us to a time when the arrival of an enigmatic man forever redefined the course of an entire community. São Benedito offers us a moving story about family, devotion, and new beginnings. It is a story that reveals how our actions affect future generations and how genuine love has the power to heal even the most painful wounds. This channel is a true treasure trove of stories similar to this one, moving testimonies from ordinary individuals who experienced extraordinary events in their villages. Each story we present is an invaluable fragment of our ancestors' heritage that cannot be forgotten. Be sure to be moved and ponder this unique case. Subscribe to the channel now, enable the bell, and leave your comment. Like the trust to encourage this important work of preserving memories. São Benedito, we are prepared to listen to your testimony. I grew up on a hidden beach on the coast of Brazil today at 78 years old. I carry the weight of time. When I look back, I notice that many things have changed, but others remain the same. The scent of the sea and the sound of the waves never leave my memory. I grew up in a fishing village of those where you could only get there by boat or after a long walk. We were about 200 families living together. Everyone knew everyone else's life. It was a small place, but to me, still a boy, it seemed infinite. My father, Afonso, fished like almost everyone there. He went out before the sun came up and returned soaked in fish and sweat. He was a good-hearted man, but a man of few words. I noticed the pride in his face when he returned with a beautiful catch for our house. My mother, Elisa, was far from her name. She was a rigid woman. She seemed to have been born old. And unhappy, she was always complaining about her luck from work to the wind that breathed. She took care of the home and prepared crafts to sell to the few visitors that showed up, but nothing ever satisfied her. I was the middle of 3 brothers. Bernardo, the oldest, was my idol at just 2 years older than me. He already knew everything about the sea and fish. Glorinha, 3 years younger, was Daddy's little girl, always clinging to his legs when he came back from the sea. Mateus, the youngest, was 5 years younger than me and was always sick, giving everyone work. Our life was hard, but we didn't know any other reality. We got up early to help Dad mend the nets before he got on the boat. Then we went to the little school in the town, a wooden shack where Donna Joselma taught us to read and add in the afternoon. We went back to help Mom cleaning fish, carrying water, and so on. It never ended, but it also had its good moments. The best was when we escaped to play in the the beach. We ran on the sand. We dove into the warm waters. We tried to fish with an improvised line. It was pure freedom. It was just me and the sea. Our routine began to change when I was about 8 years old, more or less in 1955. It was then that Pastor Attila appeared in that village. I will never forget the day he arrived. He was a tall man, wearing a dark suit, even under a scorching sun. And believe me, he barely sweated. He expressed himself eloquently, with words we had never heard at first. The people were wary. We were not adapted to outsiders. But the pastor quickly captivated the people. He began to promote meetings under the shade of an almond tree, talking about the Creator and a renewed life he promised to bring evolution to support the community. My mother was one of the first to be enchanted suddenly. That woman who was always complaining sang hymns happily. Glorinha soon became an admirer of the pastor, but my father and Bernardo did not. They trusted him a lot and claimed that he was trying to reform our way of life. I was on the fence, not knowing who to believe. On the one hand, it was good to see my mother less grumpy. On the other hand, I felt that something was changing and not for the better. The pastor raised funds and built a small but beautiful temple made entirely of wood. It was the first new construction in the village in many years. Every Sunday morning the people gathered, sang and prayed. Sometimes I went more to observe others than out of genuine belief. At that point I began to notice that things in our house were getting strange. My mother spent more time at church than at home. When she was at home, she was always praising the pastor. She said that he was an envoy of God and that I needed to follow his commandments. My father kept quiet, but it was clear that he did not approve of the conflicts between them that were already cropping up here and there. They got worse. My mother called my father a sinner who didn't want a better life. My father replied that she was going crazy, giving control of her life to a stranger. Bernardo, my older brother, began to rebel at the age of 10. He already considered himself almost a man by the standards of the town. He began to confront the pastor openly, declaring that he was ensnaring everyone. My mother went crazy. She screamed that he was possessed by the devil and gave him increasingly severe beatings. Pastor Attila got involved in everything. He ended up organizing a study group that in a short time became the main attraction on Wednesday nights. The teenagers, in particular, were attracted by the magnetic way he interpreted passages from the Bible, always associating them with the daily difficulties of the town. It didn't take long for him to propose an innovative project, a collective vegetable garden. It is essential that the town be more autonomous, he said with that smile that radiated the place. Together, they built an amazing greenhouse made entirely of metal and glass that shone in the intense coastal sun, protecting the plants from the heat and salt. People spent time admiring that construction, something worthy of a movie. On Sundays, after the service, which now filled the little church, the pastor made what he called an agape, a collective lunch in which each family brought a dish. It was a moment of conviviality that everyone looked forward to. The aroma of fresh fish, elaborate farofas, and homemade cakes mixed with laughter and conversation. But you know how it is. When the alms are great, even the saint finds it strange. That's when the appeals for contributions began. At first it was small, a few coins here and there. Then it grew. The pastor claimed that he needed donations for God's work. My mother gave everything she could, sometimes even the little we had to eat. My father was outraged. He said that we didn't have the basics, and she even offered our sustenance to the pastor. The fights got worse. Once I saw my father raise his hand against my mother. He didn't actually attack her, but the look in his eyes was terrifying. She retaliated with words, and he left the house, blind with rage. Meanwhile, I was already 10 years old. I helped my father with the fishing. I learned to row. I cast the nets. I got to know the sea. Life was hard, the sun was punishing, but I enjoyed it. I felt closer to my father in those moments. Bernardo, who was 12, couldn't take it anymore. After a very violent argument with my mother, in which she said that she would rather see him dead than see him against the pastor, he disappeared. He got on a small boat in the middle of the night and left. He left only a note saying that he would go in search of a better future. It was a blow to everyone. My father was torn apart. My mother wavered between blaming the devil and blaming my father. I lost my hero. My older brother, Glorinha, cried non-stop. And little me, Mateus, already sick, only made things worse. Our daily life was hard, but we carried on as best we could. The pastor appeared saying that this was a divine punishment, that we needed to be at church more. My mother immersed herself in faith. She dedicated the whole day to the pastor taking Glorinha and Carl Mateuska. Together, I became closer to my father. I started to go fishing, running away from the house that had become a battlefield. The sea was my refuge. Just me, my father, and the rocking of the waves. It was at this time that I noticed disturbing things in the town. Families that were harmonious now fought acquaintances who were friends, didn't talk to each other, and the pastor was in the eye of the storm. I saw him walking through the alleys, always well-dressed, always smiling. It impressed me how he remained so white, even in a place where no one escaped the scorching sun. Even children were born blushing. The pastor was different, as if the Sun King was afraid of leaning against him. The women sighed as he passed with fascinated looks, and the men revered him with a respect that was previously only given to the elderly. It was as if he had taken control of the village. His way of walking with his head held high, facing everyone, was as if he claimed ownership of everything, and in part, he was really becoming the lord of the village every day. More fishermen obeyed his instructions and listened to his words as if it were God himself speaking. I, still a boy, would look at everything with a mixture of amazement and distrust. There was something about him that bothered me, but I didn't know what it was sometimes. I thought that I myself was wrong, that maybe a devil was inside me, blocking my belief in him if I thought too much. I even feared the worst, but I also noticed strange details, like the way he looked at the younger girls with a strange glow in his eyes. I noticed that late at night, some women would leave his house, and I realized that suddenly he lived in the most equipped house in the place, while all the others remained in penury. I understood it correctly, but I saw that it was far from right. I tried to talk about it with my father, but he just shook his head and asked me not to mention anything around my mother. Life went on between hard work and fights at home, and I grew up learning about the sea, about fishing, about existence, but always with that impression that something dark was unfolding around me. Little did I suspect that the situation would still go downhill a lot before improving, that quiet town would be the scene of events that even today, at 78 years old, make me freeze. Just remembering Glorinha, my younger sister, who was glued to her mother's skirt and copied everything she did. They both lived in the church, providing services to the pastor, cleaning, decorating the hall for the services. Mateus, the youngest, made me anxious. He was fragile, he was always sick, but he seemed to have gotten worse since the pastor arrived. My mother said it was the devil trying to take him and that only faith would cure him. She took the poor thing every day. To pray, I noticed the poor little boy wasting away, getting weaker. I decided to confront his mother and said he needed a doctor, not prayers. His mother got upset, took his father's worn-out belt and beat me so badly that it left marks on my body. And the worst part is that while she was beating me, she didn't stop praying. The more she begged, the more violent she acted. Her devotion was so intense that even when she whipped me, she said I was becoming like Bernardo, that the enemy wanted to take us away too. I remained silent, enduring, because fighting back would only make everything worse. That night I cried in secret and thought about running away, finding my brother, but I didn't have the courage. I wasn't impulsive like him. I fooled myself, thinking things could get better, and I stayed there. The reality only got worse. The pastor wanted to decide everything: who married who traded with who. He even got involved in fishing techniques. He forbade some fish, claiming they were evil. My father, he refused to obey and kept his old method of casting the nets without paying attention to the pastor's prohibitions, but he found himself increasingly isolated. The other fishermen were afraid of being cursed and adopted the pastor's rules so as not to be persecuted. I, at 13 years old, worked hard, took care of the house, and tried to study with the used books that Donna Joselma lent me. She and her family had not fallen for the pastor's plot and thought to leave. It was during this time that I noticed even more shocking situations. Young girls, some younger than me, were called to special counseling. With the pastor went to his home to look down and out hours later, often crying, this happening at dusk, when the sun was already going down, to speak the truth. I did not have to take it to her. I was hard to take it to her. Forces on the legs, my back lived destroyed from holding. That boy, after I took that beating, the mother decided to make me take care of him when I was not in the sea, while she was praying for the good of all. Matthew was intelligent, dragged around the house when I was impatient, ending him to help. Even with pain in my back, this was exhaustive, but we lived too late. Not even why the mother is so much in the church. My focus was just Mateus, the craft on the boat, and resist another day anyway. Sometimes I saw Rosina, daughter of Hadark, coming out with her dress and her eyes swollen. She was only 11 or 12 when she saw me. She ran desperate, never appeared on the beach. This was then that I remembered that my sister, Glorinha, would soon come to the same age. I felt a chill ran to my father, who was fixing the nets, and said, "Dad, Glorinha will soon have this same age of Rose." I saw him pale, the countenance change. It soared, the fists, the eyes, fury. Without thinking, he said, "I help, Dad." But I didn't even realize the weight of that statement. My father stared at me at a long time, as if he first saw me, put his heavy hand on my shoulder. "This is not a thing for a boy," he said seriously, "but thanks to know that you are on the right side." Crossed arms, though. I didn't know what to do in the end. I focused on surviving another day, hoping that the worst did not happen, had no idea that the moment was coming when nothing else would be discreet. Things would start to crumble as huge waves, crashing on the beach and knocking everything down. I kept noticing how the pastor's house was always the most stocked, while the rest of the town barely had food for the family, or how he was always receiving furniture from the city. It was a stark contrast. In a place without the structure for great luxuries on any given afternoon, I took my boat and I went to sea with my father. We went quite far from the coast, beyond the reefs, in an area where he used to throw his nets. We didn't exchange many words that day. I was looking downcast. My father was also tense, with little patience. Suddenly, he called my attention. "Look there, son." I pointed my eyes in the direction he was pointing and saw something in the distance. It was another boat, large, different from our poorly maintained canoes. It had the air of a ship, big city, painted dark and with people busy on top. It aroused a shiver on me, but the father did not explain, just made me signal to be quiet, back to the town. Not saying anything, left me at home and disappeared at the same night, and never spent days on the edge of the beach, looking at the horizon, waiting to see the silhouette. Did not sleep right. Glorinha. But she also seemed to understand anything. To our little village continued, but to me the world had stopped one day a day. Something strange. I did not consider me very religious. I got up as I asked in whispers, "God, if you are really there, help me. I don't want to continue alone." And I swear I felt something different, an inexplicable warmth. Father, I did not feel totally isolated from there. I gained an inner strength to follow. Not that the situation was easy, but I could face front. I continued to help us, taking care of the house and going to fish, always vigilant. I had the impression that the pastor also watched me, but there was no distance from those who did not pray his book. May my father one day return, and perhaps Bernardo would appear out of nowhere. Was on Sunday morning that everything turned upside down. The pastor in the middle of the service stated that Turtidu Glorinha Shu would be given in marriage. Damian, a 17-year-old boy of his fisherman, my mother, almost had a stretch of so much happiness. Damian barely knew each other. They exchanged at most a good morning while the people celebrated. I felt the stomach turned. It was then that Matthew, with that perceptive way, poked me by the sleeves. "Benedito," he whispered, wide eyes. "I heard the pastor saying something sinister to Mother." I curved to understand. "What did you hear?" He looked around, with fear of being heard. "He said that the village was too small, that needed to grow, said that we needed more babies, that the children are the future." I felt a huge shiver when the wedding day arrived. There was my little one, Glorinha. Dressed in white, she cried, and the people thought it was of commotion, but I knew it was fear. Sadness was pushed after the adult. Tual, She went to live with her husband at the home of the in-laws her Pedro and Donna Rosa. I was visiting and found that Glorinha was more and more cabizba until she became pregnant early. My mother celebrated by saying it was a divine gift. But I ran myself a child, having son of another boy almost the same age, but followed the courage to face the pastor. The church not for devotion, although I believed in God, but to watch over the man I considered enemy sitting in the back, quiet. Attentive to his movement, I confess that it was impressive. The pastor's conviction involved the congregation as waves of the sea, holding all the eyes made prophecies and simulated that it was dominated by the Holy Spirit, spoke in strange tongues. They had been healed with possessions of evil spirits. Was a surreal scenario. Part of me even felt like getting carried away, but something didn't beat. I watched people coming out of the exalted saying that their lives would change, but it seemed a great theater to me, even if the crowd believed it was in a service. When my sister was already 7 months pregnant, that he gave a special sermon about blessed marriages, emphasizing that of Na Glorinha and Ra Damio, claiming that the unborn baby, it was proof of God's love for the village, and everyone celebrated, shouting, Amen, Hallelujah. And there I was, holding back the vomit of revulsion. I realized that the pastor's charisma was based on manipulating emotions. When I left, he felt like I had discovered a weak point of his. He was strong but not invincible. Maybe if someone broke that collective hypnosis, there would be a way to stop him. Glorinha. Shh. Birth was difficult. She screamed in pain, Mrs. Rosa, who acted as midwife, ran from one side to the other. It was an endless night. She only calmed down when she heard the baby crying. However, soon after, more screams and running around started. Something went wrong. My sister had lost a lot of blood. She was too young to endure a complicated birth. I thought she was going to die, but she, resilient, survived a big scare. The baby, my nephew, was born skinny, crying non-stop. The other mothers who had milk took turns breastfeeding. Glorinha was see, fragile skin and bones, and Damião suffered with the situation. Everyone only talked about it. They made promises and prayers. The pastor appeared one day and said things about challenges that test the faith. I held myself back from punching him. But Glorinha reacted well, and after days of agony she recovered and was able to hold little Samuel Gas in her arms. Seeing that little baby, so naive, born in so much adversity, broke my heart one afternoon. I sat next to Glorinha, who was cradling Samuel. She looked at me and asked, with a tired voice, "Will Daddy ever come back?" I felt a tightness. "Yes, he will come back, Glorinha, and he will fix everything." She remained silent, stroking the baby, and seemed distressed. I wish he had never left. Even with the fights, it was better than this. I didn't know what to say, so I walked closer to the pastor's house without really understanding why. I just followed my instincts. When I arrived, I noticed something unusual. Several shoes at the door, including a pair of sandals that I knew belonged to my mother. It gave me a chill down my spine. I got closer and heard voices and laughter coming from inside. I realized it was in the back, maybe in the bedroom, a strange laugh, the kind that gave me chills. My curiosity was greater than my fear. I walked forward down the hallway on tiptoe, my heart almost bursting in my chest. The bedroom door was half open. I held my breath and peeked in. What I saw tortures me to this day. Pastor Attila, without clothes, next to 3 naked women. One of them, my God, was my mother. I froze without action, or I could scream. It was as if time had stopped. I saw those bodies, the whispers, the laughter. That image was engraved in my mind for the rest of my life. When they noticed me, everything stopped. 4 pairs of eyes turned to me, scared. I saw the panic written on my mother's face and the hatred written on the pastor's face. I didn't wait a second. I turned around and ran. I didn't care if they were chasing me, if they were naked. I just ran. I got home out of breath, all sweaty. Mateus looked at me scared. "What happened?" I barely spoke. I just shook my head, confused, and walked out the door again without direction. I needed to trust someone, tell them what I had seen, but who would believe me? I remembered Seu Raimundo, an old fisherman and my father's best friend, one of the few who hadn't fallen for the pastor's story. He was the one I would turn to. I knocked hard on his door in desperation. When he opened it, I must have looked insane, wet with sweat, eyes wide. "Calm down, my son. Come in." He pulled me in and locked the door. "What happened?" I stumbled about what I had seen in the pastor's house, every shocking detail. Seu Raimundo was astonished, but listened to everything in silence. When I finished, he took a deep breath. "Are you sure about what you saw?" I just nodded, full of shame and disgust. I wouldn't make up such a slander about my mother. He scratched his beard, shaking his head. I always suspected that this pastor was no good, but this is even worse than I imagined. "What now, Seu Raimundo? What do we do? If I tell you, no one will believe you. They'll say I'm possessed, that I'm making it up," he thought, pacing back and forth. "We need proof, boy. We need to unmask him in a way that no one can deny, but we have to be careful. This guy has a lot of people on his side." Then he opened a drawer, took out an old piece of paper and a pencil stub. "Write down everything you saw, every detail. We'll keep this safe, and then we'll see how to catch this man red-handed." I obeyed and began to write, each sentence trembling, remembering the disgusting scenes. When I finished, I handed it to him, who folded it and put it in an old can hidden under the floorboards. "Now understand well, Benedito. Don't tell anyone else, not even Glorinha or Mateus, and to anyone. Pretend you didn't see anything, can you?" I nodded, still trembling. "Good. Now you will be my eyes in the village. Pay attention to everything, write down anything you suspect and tell me later. We will find a way to end this false prophet, even if it means more years." I left there relieved to have someone to support me. Even so, I was shaken. How could I look at my mother after witnessing that? When I arrived, Mateus asked again if everything was okay. I lied. "Yes, it is. Don't worry." But it wasn't, and I knew I wouldn't be okay anytime soon. Night fell. I threw myself into the hammock, but I couldn't sleep. Remembering my mother with the pastor made me feel sick and angry. I tried to push the image away, but it came back like a torment. Later, I heard my mother coming into the house, discreet footsteps, stirring the pots and pans. She pretended to be normal. "Is there any food left?" "It's in the pot," I replied dryly. She ate dinner, quietly singing those hymns as if nothing had happened. I stayed there, hating everything and everyone. The following Sunday morning, the village's routine fell apart once and for all. The church doors were broken down, and there was Bernardo, my brother, who I hadn't seen in almost 5 years, next to my father. But they weren't alone. They were accompanied by men in uniform, with serious expressions, and others in suits. When they saw the pastor, one of them spoke in a loud voice that echoed in the temple. "Attila Silveira, or should I say Otávio Matos de Abreu, you are under arrest." The assembly went wild with shock. My mother stood rigid as a statue. I dropped everything and ran with Mateus to them, crying non-stop. Glorinha came after me, holding the baby. My brother me. Bernardo was tall, thin, his face marked by the sun. We hugged each other as if we were trying to make up for lost time. My father was crying too, something I had never seen before. He did the same when he saw Glorinha hugging Samuel, that little baby he didn't know, in the middle of all that commotion. Damião approached tensely, but my father hugged him. "I know your family, young man. Your father is a good person. Take good care of my girl." "Yes, sir, Mr. Afonso," he replied, trembling. Meanwhile, the police read out loud a list of the false pastor's crimes. It was spine-chilling. Every type of scam he had committed in other states, from Bahia to Minas Gerais, deceiving towns, seducing women, abandoning children. There was also smuggling and involvement with big people in every place they passed by, left a trail of destruction, including suicides of victims who couldn't bear the shame. I felt my stomach turn after all. It wasn't just religious charlatanism. It was organized crime at the height of the accusations. We started to see more police searching the houses. They took several acquaintances away in handcuffs, people we thought were honest, but who were associated with all that. It was a huge criminal network. They took advantage of the isolation to smuggle drugs and weapons when the police chief read the accusations. My father and Bernardo nodded as if to say, "That's why we work so hard to dismantle this gang." My mother remained static, without saying anything, without showing any emotion, not even when she met her husband and oldest son again. But I understood that she was in shock. The father turned to me. "Son, it's a long story. I'll explain it to you at home." And that's when I burst into tears, like a baby hugging my brother and my other brothers. Mateus whimpered without really understanding, but felt the tension of the moment when we finally arrived. At home, he told us everything. How he had discovered the mysterious boxes on the boats, full of contraband, and also the deaths covered up under suspicious circumstances. "We connected the dots, my son," my father said. "We couldn't talk, afraid that you would be the next victims. That's why I ran away and found your brother. We spent months looking for help from reliable authorities. The system was full of bought people." Bernardo added, "It wasn't easy. The pastor was just the tip of a comprehensive scheme of drug dealers, corrupt people, even high-ranking politicians came to light. I felt stunned. My family had been destroyed, but they discovered a much bigger scheme and finally brought the police in. What I didn't expect was for the ordeal to continue." My mother remained expressionless, as if nothing affected her. The pastor's arrest, the return of her husband and son, whom she despised, nothing shook her immediately. But then, Glorinha confirmed something that would end the last bit of innocence that remained in me. "Dad, I need to tell you," she began, trembling. "Attila slept with me several times. I felt as if a knife had gone through my chest. I saw the fury forming on my father's face, while Bernardo clenched his fists. Glorinha didn't stop talking. He wanted me to get pregnant. He said it would be the holy generation." My father screamed in despair and anger. It was clear that Samuel was not Damian's son, but rather the pastor's, and that my mother had played a role in this, preparing rituals, delivering the girls an indescribable nightmare. I cried in disgust and pity when I could imagine my mother, who had given me life, facilitating this type of abuse with her own daughter. And Glorinha confessed that some friends also went through my experience. Ormo, and that the mother collaborated, thinking it was divine will. My father ran away, punching the walls, cursing that woman and saying he would never forgive her. Mateus cried quietly in a corner, not knowing what to do. Bernardo tried to calm his father, but he was inconsolable. The mother remained on the floor, as if she were not there. The days that followed were confusing. The pastor's trial dragged on, with testimonies coming from all over, and we, including my sister, went to the city to testify against him. The authorities discovered that it was a far-reaching criminal organization, but due to censorship and the military dictatorship of the time, they hushed up the case in terms of the press. Although there were heavy sentences, the pastor got 20 years, others involved got between 5 and 15 years. Some people from the village disappeared out of shame or because of the risk of retaliation. I wondered if my mother would not be arrested after all. It was proven that she had turned Glorinha in, but the authorities and the prosecutor considered that she was also a victim of manipulation, and there was no strong evidence to accuse her as an accomplice. Ended up making a deal. She would have to testify periodically and provide explanations, but she was not arrested. Even so, the village was transformed. Many new residents arrived, while others left. The father and Bernardo were acclaimed as heroes for having undone the scheme. I, who had helped in secret, felt a certain pride in them. But the family's rapprochement was complicated. My father preferred to stay at Suraimundo's own house with Bernardo. I stayed taking care of Mateus and his mother. Even though I felt a mixture of pity and disgust for her, she was my mother despite everything. A bond difficult to ignore over time. She began to take care of, Mateus. Diligently, trying to make up for lost time, she took him to the city to seek medical treatment. My father wanted to accompany the boy, and despite everything, ended up getting closer to his mother again. Mateus. His diagnosis was sequelae of polio. The doctors explained that there were some techniques that could ease the pain and improve his quality of life, but there was no cure. Even so, it was a spark of hope to see the mother trying to redeem herself by helping the youngest. I remember one night talking to her on the porch. "Why did you do that? Did you love the pastor?" She looked away, keeping her eyes on the sea. "I don't know, son. It was as if he had control over me. I couldn't react." "And Glorinha?" I asked. "Didn't you think about her?" The mother started crying. "I know I'm a monster. I deserve hell." At that moment, I saw that she was completely sorry, and as a son, I didn't know whether to console her or curse her. In the end, I did neither, and left. The village. It was finding its way again. One day, my father said, "We need to make good use of the pastor's church. It doesn't make sense to leave it there rotting as a symbol of suffering." They got together and decided to turn it into a school because Dona Joselma's old classroom was no longer useful. That's how I met Clarice, the young teacher from the city. She had just graduated and was the daughter of Sir Crispim, the owner of a small grocery store. I took Mateus to classes and was impressed by the loving way she treated him, adapting exercises so he could participate. I would arrive early just to see her. Her natural beauty and dedicated manner won me over. Bernardo also noticed and confided in me that he liked her when he lived in the city, but she looked at him like that, said it was okay if I wanted to get closer, that she didn't hold a grudge. She even gave me unexpected support, and the school started to pulsate with joy. The children laughing in that space that had previously been the scene of lies and abuse, it was as if light was replacing the darkness. Finally, Bernardo decided to leave again after a few months. "I've done my part, brother. I'm going to look for something more in life." We hugged in a painful goodbye, and I was left alone with my mother, father, Mateus, and Glorinha, living with her husband, Damião, and the baby. I learned to deal with the longing, and in the meantime, I got closer to Clarice. We fell in love, and when I turned 18, I asked her hand in marriage, a simple wedding in the city with Sir Crispim blessing us. I had to pinch myself to see if it wasn't a dream. How a simple fisherman with no education had won over that special woman, but she truly loved me and said that I made her happy. We built our little house near my mother, and even after everything, Clarice, and she got along well. It was clear how the mother tried to be a different person, and I saw that she would never forget the weight of the mistakes made. I went to work at the Fishermen's Association, earning better, and Clarice taught at the school, and so our lives went on. In the first year of marriage, Carlos was born. After 2 years, our girl, Marta, came along. I made sure to vaccinate them both in the city the right way, afraid of seeing my children go through what Mateus went through. In that misery of not having access to doctors and vaccines, time passed. Mateus lived until he was 26, when he caught a generalized infection and did not survive. It was a terrible pain. We buried the youngest near the beach where he was born. The whole village felt the loss. He was very loved, a bright boy. My sister, Glorinha, stayed by Damião's side. They had several children, and incredible as it may seem, they got along well. They built a big, happy family with boys, until a little girl came along to close the account for good. It was beautiful to see how Glorinha recovered from that past of abuse, supported by her loving husband. My father, after the age of 50, found a younger partner. There was a fuss, but he didn't care much. He just wanted to be happy in the end. People got used to it after all the suffering. Each one lived their lives as best they could. As for my mother, she aged quickly. She lived silently alone, praying. Maybe it was the regret throbbing inside her at the end of her life. She was struck by a sudden illness and spent weeks in the hospital until she died one morning. The entire village gathered for her funeral. It was a strange moment because we all knew about her sins, but she was still part of the community. The only thing missing at the funeral was Bernardo, who had been distant without forgiving her. He died without having had the chance to hear him say, "I understand you." Years later, Bernardo returned with his wife and children. He was very sorry for not having forgiven his mother while she was alive. He cried in my arms, lamenting the guilt. I should have told her that I forgave her. Now it's too late. Life went on. My children grew up and followed their own paths. They went to the city and went to college. We made an arrangement to divide Sir Crispin's assets when he passed away. I took over part of my father-in-law's business, the grocery store. The rest was inherited by my wife's sister, who lived in another city. From then on, I moved to the urban center and I was closer to my parents. Grandchildren and I approached another church with an honest pastor, truly connected to God. It was a sincere faith, without manipulation and pyrotechnics, the opposite of what I went through in the past, and I felt at peace. Clarice. I thought that this was our purpose, to show that there is an authentic spirituality based on compassion and love for others. I learned that one must separate real religion from wolves in sheep's clothing. Today, at 78 years old, I look back and notice how this tortuous path made me who I am. My love for Clarice saved my soul. We had 2 children and 8 grandchildren, 2 of whom have already given me great-grandchildren. It is gratifying to see the family expanding and life following this path. Clarice, now 80 years old, still exudes that beauty that won me over. Although her health is weakened, I spend days praying that she does not suffer too much, and if she is to leave, that I too will be taken soon. I am grateful for everything, and I praise God. Because, despite the challenges, He has always been with us, and now, to end my story on this channel, I want to talk about a bonus. The people here compiled several old recipes in a cool ebook with grandmother's teas for various purposes. There is tea to relieve joint pain, which torments me a lot these days, and even for colic and stomach pain. These are recipes that popular wisdom has confirmed and that I still use today. If you enjoyed my story, leave a like and forward it to more people, and don't forget to check out the ebook. The link is in the pinned comment. It is precious knowledge that we cannot allow to disappear. May God bless you and enlighten your family always.